Okay, so among all of the other RC projects I have going on at the moment, I have started to work on the Associated 89 Stealth Kit. I know I'm a bit late to this. A bunch of people have already built theirs, but I just haven't really made the time for it myself personally. I also wanted to see if I can get my son to build it with me. And I got him to do a couple of things, like he helped me build the rear gearbox, but his interest in building these things is a bit on and off, right? He's not really old enough yet to to fully commit to building these things. So I figured I'd just go ahead and continue some of the build without him. So I got up to essentially page 11 or thereabouts, because I'm deviating a bit from the manual, but around page 11. And in short, so far so good. I don't see any errors in the manual. That's quite a departure from the last build that I had with associated stuff was with the RC10 B6. Gosh, that was like 9 years ago. That was the last time I built an associated kit. And that manual had a whole bunch of problems, and that really like put me off of associated for a long time, unfortunately. But this manual is pretty good. So hats off to them, at least so far, for doing a good job. I will point out a few things that I'm doing differently. So perhaps the most obvious here is the A&L steering rack. I tend to put these in as many vintage kits as I can. I do like the product. It's also a stronger steering rack than most steering racks you'll get, so you'll never have to worry about having to replace this, or if you know, it's just not going to break, or you'd have to be really stupid to make it break. So that's one thing. The other thing that I changed was up front here, the way the front tower mounts onto the front bulkhead. It only mounts with 2 screws here, okay? And the manual just has you run the screw up against the tower to mount into the bulkhead. But generally, I like to try to spread the load out as much as possible between the tower and the screw. So I just put a washer in there between the screw head and the tower. Okay, because you only have those 2 mounting points. So if you hit something from the top here, if the car flips over and it pushes this tower back, this washer will help to spread the load out, so you're less likely to either break the bulkhead or break the tower. Okay, so that's why those washers are really important. So the manual doesn't call for that. I just put those in there. It does push the screw head out a little bit, but you still have clearance between the screw head and the steering rack, so you're still okay for clearance. The other thing that I've done so far is, we'll get to this part in a minute, but before we get to that, the rear arm mounts, these have a kick up. I think it's probably 3-degree kick up. I'm not sure about the toe. Looking at it from the top, it doesn't look like there's toe, but maybe there is. Generally, I found that, or not kick up, sorry, anti-squat. The kinds of tracks that I'm running on, they're either smooth and lower grip, or they are higher grip and bumpy. And in both scenarios, I've personally found that less anti-squat tends to work better for those conditions. If you have a smooth, high grip track, more anti-squat will help you out. But for the way that I drive and for what I want out of the car, I want less anti-squat for the tracks I go to. So all I did was I put a washer, I forget how thick it is, under this, the rear section here between the chassis and the arm mount, just to lift up the rear portion to reduce the anti-squat. It's not 0. It's maybe around 1.5 degrees, so less than the stock, apparently 3 degrees anti-squat. That's one little thing. I could probably play around with putting more shims in there or less shims in there to try to get it to exactly 0. But one thing you just got to be a little careful with is if you lift this up too high, then this portion here, even though it's cut out, if this is too high up, it can rub up against the diff out drive. Okay, so there is kind of a limit to how much is, let's say, prudent to reduce anti-squat by using that little sort of washer trick. Maybe at some point Associated will release a different rear arm mount with 0 anti-squat where the front portion is thinner, so that pushes the front down instead of pushing the rear up like what I'm doing here. That would be better, but this is what I have, it's what I'm working with, so that's what I did. And then as far as the gearbox goes, it's kind of interesting to me that although it went together fine, the thrust bearing on this is fully assembled, right? It doesn't come like all the other RC10 diffs I've ever built, where you have to build the thrust bearing out of the plates and balls, you know, piece by piece. In this one, the thrust bearing is a bit more like this. It's sort of a pre-assembled, you know, balls in a cage here. So that makes it a lot easier. And that also made it easier for my son to do that part of the assembly, because I couldn't imagine him trying to build a diff using, you know, these teeny tiny little thrust balls and putting them all in place. The next thing is this bit here. So I've run, okay, so with this 89 Stealth, the original idea is to have, where are they? These guys here, right? These universals with the 1/4-inch wheel axle, and then on that you put a Yokomo wheel hub to adapt it to running Yokomo rims, and then you run Yokomo rims in the back. But those particular rims are the offset Yokomo rims from the 870. Those would not be the Yokomo rims that you run on like the 94 YZ10, for example, which is what a lot of my Yokomo rims have tires mounted on. So if I were to run this particular setup, I'd have to basically buy a bunch of offset Yokomo rims and a bunch of tires and mount them all up. I would much rather be able to share tires between this and my RC10 B2, my Kyosho RB Type R. They use the same rims. So if I could convert it back to a pin style, or maybe even a hex rim, I could just put a hex adapter on here and run my RB6 rims, that would be nice. So in the past, if you wanted to do something like this on, let's say, the World's car, that has shorter rear arms. So you'd need to use the, I think the B44 center dog bones, and then mate those up against just the standard wheel axle, and then use the RC10 GT rear hubcare, and that would kind of work. On this one, though, the arms are a bit longer. So that gives you, so the B44 style rear dog bones are way too short to work with this. And if you use like the B4 rear CVAs or CVDs, those are actually too long unless you play a trick. So all I did here is this, as you probably know, is a B4, or let's say 4th generation RC10, so B44, B4, T4 style rear hub carrier, which is pretty cool because you can get these in 1/2 degree rear toe or 0 degrees rear toe, and you can get different hub towers that have different ball heights and 3 holes to adjust camber gain. So you do roll center and camber gain on the rear. Plenty of tunability, which for a car like this that isn't that tunable is pretty cool. The thing is, though, if you use this normally, if you build it normally, this dog bone ends up being too long and it'll bottom out against the diff. So what did I do? Well, normally you'd mount a bearing in here, and then between this bearing, and the bearing that goes on the inside, you have a little crush tube. That's actually this guy right here. Now the bearing on the inside normally is a 3/16 by 3/8 bearing. But the outer surface of that bearing, the way that it mounts, ends up pushing everything in because this dog bone is too long. So what did I do? Well, if you take the crush tube out and you can fit a bearing in the housing where the crush tube goes, then that'll push everything out a bit so you have enough clearance for this B4 length dog bone to fit. So the bearing that happens to fit in there is a 3/16 by 5/16 flanged bearing, because that inner diameter of that innermost opening there is actually 5/16 of an inch, so it fits perfectly. And that pulls everything out just enough so you can run a B4 style CVD or CVA without it bottoming out against the diff. I do happen to have one tiny little axle shim on the inside here, and then on the outside I just took the crush tube and pushed it to the outside, and I have a couple of shims on the inside here just to pick up the gap, and then there you go, you're all set. Yeah, so I by the way, I do not know for sure if this gives you the exact same width as you would have with the stock setup, right? With this and the Yokomo wheel hubs. I'll have to just build that and just to measure it to see if that's the case. Because if this is using B2 rims that have a certain offset because of the dish, or the way the disc, is concave, that's going to push the outer part of the rim out. Does that give me the correct rear width compared to having the stock setup with the, stock rear hub carrier and the Yokomo style rims? Is it the same? I don't know yet, but this at least will allow me to run B2 rims, and it does appear to work. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and I also have 0 degree hub carriers that I'll also set up so I have tuning options, and one day I'll run this at one of the races that we have going on. So anyway, I figured I'd share this with you guys. Anyone that has an 89 Stealth kit, you can do a B4 setup for the rear, give yourself more tunability, because the way the bulkhead is set up, you only have this hole here for the ball stud. I guess you could use that inner hole in this one, but that's not much. You can do a lot more with the hub carrier here. Okay, so yeah, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.